Socialism is neither Protestant nor Catholic, Christian nor freethinker, Buddhist, Mohammedan nor Jew. It is only human. We of the socialist working class realise that, as we suffer together, we must work together that we may enjoy together. We reject the firebrand of capitalist warfare and offer you the olive branch of brotherhood and justice, to and for all. In the 1790s, many of the founding fathers of Irish republicanism were themselves Protestant, but in 1930s Ulster, Protestant meant unionist. One of the unique features of the Republican Congress was the level of support it enjoyed from Ulster Protestants, and arguably this was to be the last time they would seriously engage with Irish republicanism.
Well, in order to promote the idea of republicanism in its purest form, Republicans throughout the ages have forwarded the idea as the man of no property, regardless of religious background. So it's a non-sectarian ideology in the official sense.
In 1934, trade unionists from the Shankill Road and other Protestant areas of Belfast visited the grave of James Connolly at Arbour Hill in Dublin before taking part in the annual Wolf Tone commemoration at Bodenstown. This was a highly unusual situation for Ulster Protestants to find themselves in. Normally they would be hostile to the Free State, to republicanism and to the socialism that James Connolly put forward in his own lifetime. The Republican Congress newspaper noted that a speech was delivered by Robert McVicker, an Ulsterman, who asked, "Is Ireland free today when its children live in slums where they cannot play and be happy? Are Irish workers free today when they spend their lives fighting against poverty and disease?" There was a lot of support in Belfast for the idea of a Republican Congress, and it was actively supported by the Northern Ireland Socialist Party, a small working class party drawn mainly from the Protestant working class. Many members of the NISP were actively involved in the Belfast Trade Union Council, and it was this close relationship that would give the Congress a foothold here. While Congress was growing in the south, you had the establishment of Connolly clubs here in Belfast, bringing Protestant and Catholic working class men and women together. As we've discussed previously, when the idea of the Republican Congress was first mooted, the Belfast Trade Union Council responded favourably, and in September 1934 they held a special convention here in Belfast. They believed that the horrors of the capitalist economic system, the menace of fascism and the issue of Irish unity were all interconnected. They believed that it was only through the unification of the Catholic and Protestant working class, north and south of the border, that answers to these questions could be found. Many members of the Republican Congress regarded their ability to organise the Protestant working class as one of their finest achievements. George Gilmore remembered it as a spectacular success, and he said, "Not since the days of the United Irishmen had Protestants in the North engaged with republicanism in such a way." It was when the Shankill Road contingent came here to Bodenstown to commemorate Theobald Wolfe Tone, hours after commemorating James Connolly at Arbour Hill, that things turned ugly. This was ironic, given Tone's dictum of uniting Catholic, Protestant and the Centre.
As a member of the executive of the European Small Farmer Committee movement, I marched behind various kinds of banners in nearly every country in Europe. But the one banner that it gives me greatest pleasure to remember that I marched behind and defended it to the slogan, I think not very commonly used. I rallied behind the banner to defend it to the slogan, "Up the Shankill Road." There was a group of Protestant workers from the Shankill Road came to the march in Bodenstown, about 60 of them I think, and very stupidly a company of a battalion was told off to seize the banner. And for a minute the fellows carrying it and we who accompanied them were a bit taken aback. And then was raised the slogan that never before was heard in Bodenstown, up the Shankill Road. And to that revolutionary slogan we defended that banner.
There were certainly hundreds of trade unionists from the north that summer in Bodenstown. It said they arrived down by the coachload. While most of the members of the Republican Congress were allowed to march unmolested to the cemetery, some brigades in the IRA took exception to the presence of the Shankill Road Protestant contingent. The Tipperary Brigade tried to prevent them from leaving Sallins unless they rolled up their banners. There is some disagreement over whether what happened at Bodenstown was motivated by sectarianism. The IRA had asked groups not to march behind unauthorised banners, and those who followed this order were allowed to take part in the commemoration unmolested. There is a belief that the IRA was trying to exert some control over the Republican Congress. The Northerners marched behind two banners, one of which read, Shankill Road Branch, break the connection with capitalism. The other, James Connolly Club's Belfast, the United Irishman of 1934. One of the men carrying the latter banner was Jim Straney, who would later give his life on the Ebro front in the Spanish Civil War.
Again, speculation on whether the Shankill Road banner or the fact that Protestants were marching had something to do with that attack. But given that tensions were starting to rise between the IRA and the Republican Congress at that time, I think it's likely that it was more to do with that rivalry than a traditional sectarian issue.
It was actually political sectarianism. Nobody at the time alleged that religion had anything to do with it at all. Nobody made that claim in 1934. What was evident was that the IRA, because it was their commemoration, wanted to control the contingents and the banners that they carried. Everybody who took part in the Bodenstown commemoration had to clear what banners they were going to carry with the IRA beforehand. The Congress refused to do so. I think they decided to make a point that they were big enough and strong enough to march at Bodenstown without having to clear it with the IRA. The Communist Party, on the other hand, obeyed the IRA's instructions and their contingent wasn't interfered with. But the Congress went ahead. There was a clash with the IRA, attracted a lot of bad publicity, and is, of course, very symbolic because the fact that people from Belfast were involved in it, but it really was to do with political rivalry rather than religion.
When you think of it, the first time the Protestant working class in, say, 200 years had come out and re-identified itself, even in a small element, for the IRA not to understand that because of its doctrinaire position of, you know, we are the ones in charge and we decide. You know, that's such a huge tragedy looking backwards.
I remember Peadar O'Donnell making a point about apart from the attacks, he said, on the men of the Shankill, he said the thing that really affronted them when they got near to the point that the meeting started, he said, was when somebody took out their rosary beads. Well, he said, you know, you could definitely convince Shankill men, he said, to follow Old Town, but you would never get them to say the rosary. This was an ambition too big. And I think there's a lot to it. In fact, it shows that there was insufficient work done to convince people about what they were doing, that those elements didn't understand these issues. And it maybe you could say they were premature. On the one hand, it was terrific what they had done, but were they premature in bringing down people without preparing the ground and doing more work with the people they were bringing them down to? Well, I wouldn't blame them for that. I mean, most of the blame has to go on the people who attacked them, because really, I mean, they had a responsibility. It was disgraceful what happened.
The following year, a Communist Party contingent were prevented from carrying their own banner here at Bodenstown, indicating that IRA feeling had not changed. The Irish Workers' Voice communist newspaper said that this was a sign of the kind of freedom the middle-class leaders of the IRA want, an inflammatory statement that wouldn't help heal the relationship between Republicans and Communists.
And certainly it's always and ever will be to the entire and absolute credit of the Republican Congress and those that brought the Congress together, that they were able to influence such a large number of Protestant people, Unionist people in other circumstances, certainly from the Protestant community, to come to County Kildare and join in that. And the tag of rotten prod is something that to this very day exists. It's something that's bandied about within that community, and it is a powerful and damaging indictment on those who have the courage to stand up against it. But when they went to Bodenstown, they were making a very conscious decision that the path and the progressive path lay in one direction. And it was that remains incredibly important to this very day, that there can be unity, but only around a clear, transparent and unambiguous policy of a socialist republic.
The unity of the working class of different religions was very important to the Congress. They had worked together before, for example in the relief strikes in Belfast, even if only on a temporary basis. We can see how much faith the Congress placed in non-sectarianism by looking at their response to rioting that occurred in Limerick in 1935. On the night of the 25th of July 1935, a man smashes the windows of a hardware shop here at Upper William Street. His name was Patrick Gibbons. Having smashed the windows, he walked a short distance to his home just around the corner. Gardaí arrived at the scene of the crime, got the suspect's name and went to question him, but little could they know at that point that Gibbons, through his actions, had kicked off an unprecedented night of street violence here in Limerick. When Gardaí arrested Gibbons, a hostile crowd, 300 strong, gathered around them. They then marched off in the direction of Catherine Street. Fighting broke out outside the hall on Catherine Street, but others went back to William Street and continued breaking windows there. Some in the mob broke into smaller groups and made their way through the back lanes of the city. Attempts by Gardaí to contain the mob were met by a barrage of missiles, and many of them gathered here at Perry Square. Their numbers in fact increased. They've been picking up stragglers as they went across the city, and they continued breaking windows here. Gardaí ultimately failed either to contain the crowd or protect property. Gardaí baton charged the crowd in O'Connell Street, and this forces the mob to split up yet again. Some go to Patrick Street and attack yet more buildings, while others come here to Henry Street. The pubs are closing at this time and the streets are black with people. Gardaí feel that they're losing control of the situation and they call on the army from the nearby Sarsfields barracks. The army in the German-style helmets of the day formed a cordon which ran the length of O'Connell Street just behind me and allowed the Gardaí to launch further baton charges. By 2 a.m, the Gardaí had largely restored order here in Limerick City, and surprisingly, there are only 5 arrests on that occasion. What happened here can't be written off as the action of drunken louts, however. There was a very sinister dimension to the violence in Limerick.
The important thing is that all the premises that were attacked in Limerick were Protestant, or Protestant-owned, or Protestant places of worship. And what had happened really across the Free State in July 1935 was a reaction to pogroms against Catholics in Belfast. And when news really spread of what was happening in Belfast, which was the worst sectarian rioting since 1922, you had a wave of attacks on Protestants in the Free State. In Limerick there was a full-scale riot. In Galway there was actually a general strike demanding Protestants be sacked from their jobs, and there was burning of Protestant churches and smashing of windows in Protestant-owned premises, lots of threatening letters to Protestants as well. The Republican Congress come out full square against this. They argue that the pogroms across the border, that it's a disgraceful attack on Protestants living in the Free State, and that the Republican and the Labour movement should condemn it and should physically take a stand against it. And they condemn the trade unions and they condemn Republicans for not doing enough to stop what they see as sectarian pogroms, which again could be a relatively unpopular stance in some circles to take at the time.
The Republican Congress showed their firm anti-sectarianism through their response to events here in Limerick and indeed also in Belfast. They remained firm to their belief that socialism alone could unite the Irish working class and in their rejection of false divisions based on religion. They showed this in 1934 and again in 1935. Given this commitment to anti-sectarianism, it's not surprising that trade unionists from the Protestant East Belfast were willing to attend the Republican Congress in Rathmines. But that Congress had difficulties of its own, which were yet to come.